Let's face it, we all have a favorite image or line of dialogue in the MCU that sticks in our heads. Mine's a toss-up between Black Panther stepping through the portal in Endgame, or Drax showing off his powers of invisibility. Both are pretty good. Anyway, what makes these scenes even better is the fact that the imagery and plot points are sometimes taken directly from the comics that inspired them, such as iconic battles between hero and villain, one of the best Cap moments of all time, and even a moment involving Lego. Let's dive in! Now, I have had some pretty great movie theater experiences in my lifetime, but easily one of the best was Avengers Endgame and the moment Cap wielded Mjolnir for the first time. I got some serious chills, and I'm pretty sure everyone in the audience cheered that day. It was an epic moment and one that had been teased since Age of Ultron. Fans had long expected to see Cap wield Mjolnir, so when he finally got his chance in Endgame, many a Marvel head quickly went wild. But while Cap has only lifted Mjolnir once in the MCU, he has lifted the mighty hammer multiple times in the comics, with his first time dating all the way back in Mighty Thor 390. Speaking of Cap, another moment that gave me chills was the moment that Cap and Iron Man went toe-to-toe in Civil War, especially the moment that Cap uses his shield to deflect Tony's blasts. At that moment, it didn't really matter if you were Team Cap or Team Iron Man, it was the showdown everyone wanted to see, and in terms of visuals, it was majestic. It is no surprise then that such a great shot was basically an exact replica of a comic book frame. The Civil War storyline in the comics was extremely popular, and although there were many more characters involved in the comics, the fundamentals were the same, with one team led by Tony and the other by Steve. The comics also have the same conclusion, with Cap and Tony going head-to-head, and the Russos made sure to bring that exact moment to life on the big screen. While we are on the subject of epic matchups, one of the greatest moments of the Black Panther movie was the initial showdown between Killmonger and T'Challa. While Ryan Coogler initially wanted cult villain Kraven to be the movie's antagonist, the legal issues prevented him from doing so. But this probably worked in his favor, as it allowed Michael B. Jordan to shine as the complicated Killmonger. What made Killmonger so complex was the relationship between him and T'Challa, but also the fact he was an absolute beast. When the two went toe-to-toe, we see just how much of a force Killmonger is, as he defeats T'Challa with relative ease, and, just for good measure, throws him off a waterfall. This is another moment that is plucked right out of the comics.
What do we do, Cap?
We fight.
Another one of my favorite moments is when the Avengers go against each other in the famous airport battle in Civil War, as we get to see a range of different heroes use their own powers against one another, and even some pretty fun team-ups.
I believe this is yours, Captain America.
One such team-up happened between Hawkeye and Ant-Man, as Scott rides on top of Clint's, or as Scott calls them, Arrow Guy's arrows, so he can enter Iron Man's suit and disable it. The two also use this trick in the comic, with it even being the cover art for Avengers 223, as the two of them battle with Taskmaster and try to disable his weapon. With Spider-Man having an array of powers including wall climbing, superhuman reflexes, and of course his infamous Spidey sense, it can be easy to forget just how strong he is. But Spidey's strength was on full display in Spider-Man Homecoming, as he uses his physical prowess to prevent himself being buried by rubble. The moment is a reference to The Amazing Spider-Man 33, where Peter finds himself buried under rubble after Doc Ock steals a cure for Aunt May's life-threatening illness, and uses his strength to get out of his predicament. In the MCU, we often think about all the emotional turmoil humans go through as they deal with countless attacks from aliens, have half the population snapped away, and now even have to worry about members of the Avengers, forcing them to become sitcom characters. But Asgardians probably have it even rougher, as they have had to deal with multiple changes in leadership, the destruction of their homeworld, and their near annihilation at the hands of Thanos after he attacked their ship. Now, while not all of these happened in the comics, the destruction of Asgard and the fulfillment of Ragnarok certainly did. In the comics, Surtur again has a big involvement in destroying Asgard and its people, actually going one step further than the MCU version, with him destroying every Asgardian other than Thor and Loki. You know, actually, come to think of it, maybe the Asgardians will feel they got off lightly after all. Speaking of Asgard and its leadership though, another thing the MCU and the comics share is at some point Loki has been king of Asgard. Despite it happening almost instantaneously in the movies, the god of mischief had to wait a lot longer in the comics. Loki finally got to become king in the 2004 Loki miniseries, but seeing as the character was first introduced in 1962, he had to wait a long old time. Just teaches you patience really is a virtue. Loki may like the word king, but one word he certainly does not like is Hulk.
What's the matter with you? You're embarrassing me. I told them we were friends.
And it is no surprise he was so scared to see him as a gladiator on Sakaar in Thor Ragnarok. But this isn't the first time the Hulk has been a gladiator. One of Ragnarok's primary inspirations was the Planet Hulk storyline, where Hulk finds himself on an alien planet, where he seeks to overthrow the world's leader, the Red King. While Planet Hulk is Thorless, Hulk's gladiator getup is very similar to what we see in Ragnarok, and it was definitely one of the movie's highlights. Although not having that much screen time, Thanos' lackey Ebony was a unique villain as well as being Thanos' #1 fan. Ma also showed he was a force in his own right, going up against Doctor Strange before torturing him with microsurgery needles to try and get the Time Stone from him. As we mentioned before, the Russos did like to take panels from the comics directly and turn them into scenes, so it is no surprise that scene also takes place in the comics. During the Marvel Infinity event, Ma also tortures Strange, but in the comics actually forces him to be a double agent and to work for the Black Order. Thankfully for Strange, Ma didn't have a chance to do that as he was sucked into space. Speaking of Strange, in his 2016 Origins movie, we see a scene where he uses the astral plane to aid Christine Palmer in performing surgery on himself. Yeah, I bet Christine didn't find that stressful at all. This scene, though, is a reference to the comics, where in The Oath, Strange also uses the astral plane to assist a nurse who is also tending to his physical form. I can't even use a urinal if there's someone else in the room, let alone perform surgery on someone as they watch me in astral form. Then again, I'm also not a doctor. Out of all the non-Avengers movies, Captain America Winter Soldier is probably one of the most universally loved, with Cap pitted against Hydra in a more grounded thriller. Cap and Natasha learn the full extent of Hydra's evil scheme as they come across a very alive Arnim Zola, well, kind of alive, as he has transferred his consciousness into a machine. Again, this is a storyline the Russos took from the comics, as the scientist transfers his consciousness into a computer after receiving a deadly infection, although there is something even creepier about Zola's MCU transformation. One of the reasons Ragnarok was so successful was that it brought Taika Waititi's dry wit into the MCU.
Welcome to Thor Ragnarok.
A scene that springs to mind is the moment Karl Urban's executioner shows off his new assault rifles.
I pulled him out of a place on Midgard called Texas.
But the executioner's blaze of glory in the movie wasn't just another addition from Waititi, but is almost an exact remake of the comic books. In Mighty Thor 362, just like in the movie, the Executioner charges into Hela's army of the undead, even though he knows it won't end well for him, and his combat style is almost identical. Now, we've already talked about some classic Marvel matchups here, but none of them quite compare to the biggest one of them all, Black Panther versus a Rhino. In the final climax of the movie, to take down the Dora Milaje's attempted coup, W'Kabi brings his armored rhinos to the table and sends them straight for the Dora. Thankfully though, T'Challa saves the day by body-checking the rhino as if he were playing hockey and not fighting a 5,000-pound animal. This is similar to a scene from the comics when, in Jungle Action 9, T'Challa saves a child from a charging rhino. For anyone who has seen Captain America: The First Avenger, you will know that it wasn't straight to the action for Cap, since he has to originally settle for just selling war bonds instead of fighting bad guys. One way he does this though is by smacking Hitler right in the face, and of course, this is a hilarious comic book Easter egg. In fact, it is almost directly recreating the cover art for the 1941 issue of Captain America Volume 1, right down to the bright red boots. And finally, one of Spider-Man Homecoming's most revolutionary aspects is just having a cast who actually looks like teenagers instead of a bunch of 30-year-olds. Take, for example, Ned, who actually looks like he should be studying for exams as opposed to having kids and a mortgage. However, although Ned is a character in the comics, his likeness and personality is actually more similar to a different character, Ganke Lee, who is friends with another Spider-Man, Miles Morales. But one of the biggest similarities between Ganke and Ned is how they both learn their friends are Spider-Man. In Homecoming, Peter returns to his room in his Spidey suit, only to find Ned waiting for him with a Lego Death Star. R.I.P. Lego Death Star, you will not be forgotten. This is similar to the comics where Miles enters Ganke's room to reveal his powers, causing many a Lego to go flying. Let's end with an honorable mention, shall we? In Infinity War, as a portion of the Avengers battle Thanos on Titan, Spider-Man hits him in the face with his webbing to try and blind him. This also happens in the comics, although it ends even worse than being turned to dust, as Spidey is killed by one of Thanos' lackeys. Godspeed, Spider-Man.